Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another edition of our Unrated Underappreciated movie review series, and this edition will focus on the exciting hostage thriller The Negotiator. Released in July 29th, 1998, it stars Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey and was directed by F. Gary Gray. The setup here is that the main story focuses on a highly skilled hostage negotiator, Danny Ronan, seemingly at the top of his profession and everything is going well in his life, but suddenly strange events take a turn when his partner tells him of a secret informant within the FBI is investigating their police department for a possible case of money embezzlement from a trust fund set up by the police. All of a sudden, Danny's life falls apart when he finds himself accused of a murder that he didn't commit. Seemingly destroyed and destined for jail, he becomes desperate and takes matters into his own hands when he goes into a building and starts taking hostages in order to buy time to prove his innocence. He demands police officer Chris Sabian, played by Kevin Spacey, to be in charge of the hostage negotiations, and as the story progresses, we get lots of tensions as the hostage negotiator struggles to get to the truth of who framed him from the murder that he didn't commit. Tensions continue to escalate as the police unit, who were colleagues of Danny Ronan, eagerly looks for ways to infiltrate the building and apprehend him. Now, I've always liked The Negotiator. I think it's a great thriller that develops its setup very well and lots of action that's built up with good suspense and tension throughout. It remains constantly compelling as the intensity of the hostage situation continues to escalate and we find out different elements of the police force and potential of corruption and rogue activity. Of course, it has the very novel approach of the hero taking hostages, which adds, I think, a fresh dimension to the action genre. There will be many that will dismiss this as a typical Die Hard ripoff, but I don't see that. I think there's a far more interesting elements within the story. And for all the action set pieces, The Negotiator is very much more about tactics and strategy and a game of wits, really, as we see the various personalities and characters involved, really about positioning and the ramifications of what a person does. And as the story develops, we see a lot more people become desperate as the situation intensifies. And I think that's what makes Negotiator really such a special action thriller. The film is bolstered by two excellent lead performances from both Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey. In the lead role, Jackson confirms again why he is one of the industry's most compelling actors. After a long-standing start to his career, he propelled himself to mainstream recognition in Pulp Fiction, Die Hard with a Vengeance, and A Time to Kill. And these are more supporting roles, so I think when we look at The Negotiator, this was really the first real mainstream movie where Samuel L. Jackson is in the lead role, and I think he carries the movie very well. Yes, we do get the typical shouty, abrasive personality that he's really established himself throughout his career, but there is also a vulnerability as Danny Ronan continues to become more desperate and tired as the situation escalates, and he has a determined resolve to find out the truth, what went on and who has framed him for murder. And I think Jackson handles this character and personality very well. It's a very good lead performance for him. He's equally complemented by Kevin Spacey, who himself was also on his way to becoming one of the industry's leading actors, having just come off winning an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for the great movie Usual Suspects. He also had high profile roles in Seven and also later on in LA Confidential, and shortly after The Negotiator he would then go on to win his second Oscar a year later in 1999 for American Beauty. So Spacey, I think this confirms he's a very versatile and more of a subtle actor, and as Chris Sabian, he's a much more of a calmer, more softly spoken negotiator. He's very proud of his current record of a zero casualty rate, and he constantly refers to that as he clashes constantly with the police unit and also with the FBI, who are threatening to take over the operation as it continues to escalate. So there's a constant battle that Chris Sabian has, not only with trying to negotiate with Danny, but also to fend off the FBI and trying to find a compromise with the FBI unit, with the police unit, who were also former colleagues of Danny Ronan. So it's a very good performance as well by Kevin Spacey, and it's a great contrast, I think, between the two characters. As I mentioned before, Sabian is the much more calmer personality, and Danny Ronan is a much more of a fiery character, and both Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey have great chemistry and dynamic as they struggle to find a compromise to determine whether Danny is innocent or not. And Negotiator, I think, continues that current trend of what we had throughout the 90s, where you had two more character driven actors rather than physically driven one, and I think it makes it much more of a less formulaic and typical action genre to have two more character driven actors in the roles. I also love the musical score by Graham Revell, which has that strong, bold, militarized kind of tone to it, which I think just adds more credence and seriousness to the story. And overall, I think director F. Gary Gray does a great job. As well as setting up the tension and the story, he does deliver very well executed and well shot action sequences. This isn't the typical shaky cam or explosive action sequences, and that's what I think is also good about the Negotiator, is that for all the action, for all the unlikely setup, it still remains a grounded realism about it. It doesn't really go over the top in terms of its action or its characters. It's more about setting up the tension and the scenario and really presenting what different ways and avenues that the narrative can take into. So I think its story is what holds them up most. That is what's my strongest about this film, despite the great action sequences throughout. So if I had to give The Negotiator a score, I would give it an 8.7 out of 10. Now, if we focus on the release of The Negotiator, on a budget of 43.5 million, it only managed to sadly gross 88 million, barely broken even at the box office. Now, there are a number of reasons I think for this. I think the genre of the action thriller at this point, late stage within the 90s, was over familiar and probably felt a bit lower in scale at this point compared to the level of action movie experiences of the 1990s that we had, which were a lot more outlandish and spectacular in terms of their concept and in terms of ideas. So as I mentioned before, I think Negotiator maybe felt a bit more lower in scale and a bit less restrained, or more restrained, compared to the exciting blockbuster action movies that we got throughout the decade. Both Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey, their careers were really on the rise, and at this stage they were really known for more supporting performances. So whilst later on after Negotiator they would really become more leading actors, at this stage this was really the first movie where they were leading the action, so they didn't quite have that box office powerhouse status, for example, of a Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks at this stage. So maybe that was another reason why, that whilst everybody respected Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey and they had good critical reception, they didn't quite have that box office A-list status. So that might have been not enough to draw in crowds and audiences. Also, Negotiator was released in the summer of 1998, and it was surrounded by many other big event movies. If we look at the Godzilla project of 1998, we look at Armageddon, which was the biggest box office grossing movie of that year, Saving Private Ryan, which had huge blockbuster success for Steven Spielberg as well. So released in amongst those movies, it was very difficult, I think, for The Negotiator to stand out and be its own big blockbuster movie, which very much was the intention. This was not indeed a small intimate drama. I think this was intended to be a big box office blockbuster, but when you surround yourself around other bigger projects, it's very difficult to distinguish yourself, and I think that was another issue as to why The Negotiator didn't really stand out and become the big box office success that people were hoping for. It may have been much more of a bigger benefit to release either before or after the summer season, and I think that maybe would have given The Negotiator a better chance to succeed at the box office. But overall, I still think it's a shame, because I think it's a terrific action thriller, solid story that unfolds at a nice leisurely pace that you can understand, and great characterization, and fueled by terrific lead performances from both Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey, The Negotiator is definitely an action thriller that deserves more recognition on its release and after as well. So it's definitely a movie I think that is worth checking out. So let me know what you think in the comments below. That's my overall review for The Negotiator. Please hit those like and subscribe buttons and help me grow this channel in the long run, where I can provide more high quality content and continue this series of movie reviews where I look at movies that I believe deserve more recognition and attention in the long run. If you've seen The Negotiator, let me know what you think. Do you think it was a very good thriller? It was a very good action entry within the genre of the 1990s? Do you think it deserved more recognition, or do you think it pales in comparison to the much more spectacular movies that we got within the 1990s? Is it one of your favourite films of Samuel L. Jackson or Kevin Spacey's career, or do you think they've done far more superior and more eventful movies in their career? So that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.